Hello there, my name is Giovanni Flores and I'm going to talk about compassionate use of Remdesivir for patients with severe COVID-19. Definition: Remdesivir, a nucleotide analog prodrug that inhibits viral RNA polymerases, has shown in vitro activity against SARS-CoV-2. Remdesivir also has broad-spectrum activity against members of several virus families including filoviruses, like Ebola, and coronaviruses, like SARS-CoV and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, like MERS-CoV, and has shown prophylactic and therapeutic efficacy in non-clinical models of these coronaviruses.
Currently a randomized controlled clinical trial for a new antiviral drug for the novel coronavirus. The drug is called Remdesivir, and it's currently being given in China to some patients with the novel coronavirus. On January 26th, a 35-year-old patient in the United States who had the 2019 novel coronavirus received Remdesivir a week after he was admitted to the hospital, according to reports. 5 days after being treated with Remdesivir, with all of his symptoms resolving except for his cough, which had improved. Remdesivir is a novel nucleotide analog prodrug originally developed by the biopharmaceutical company Gilead Sciences as a treatment for Ebola and Marburg virus, though it has subsequently also been found to show reasonable antiviral activity against somewhat related viruses like respiratory syncytial virus and coronaviruses. Remdesivir is yet to be approved anywhere globally, and although it appears to be safe, it still has not been proven to be safe or effective for any use. However, the encouraging result prompted Gilead and the Chinese authorities to move the phase 3 clinical trial ahead and expand it to a lot more patients who need treatment desperately. According to Dr. Anthony Fauci of the CDC, he says, "What they're looking at is the effect of this drug, either the drug plus standard of care versus standard of care alone. I think pretty soon we're going to get a definitive answer whether one of these among several drugs works."
Applications in medicine. We provide Remdesivir in a compassionate use basis to patients hospitalized with COVID-19, the illness caused by infection with SARS-CoV-2. Patients were thus with confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection who had an oxygen saturation of 94% or less while they were breathing ambient air or who were receiving oxygen support. Patients received a 10-day course of Remdesivir consisting of 200 mg administered intravenously on day 1, followed by 100 mg daily for the remaining 9 days of treatment. In approved cases, the planned treatment was a 10-day course of Remdesivir consisting of a loading dose of 200 mg intravenously on day 1, plus 100 mg daily for the following 9 days.
Arguably, the most notable characteristic of Remdesivir is its broad and potent antiviral properties against a wide array of RNA viral families. Focusing specifically on coronaviruses, Remdesivir possesses submicromolar EC50 values against human and zoonotic coronaviruses, including MERS-CoV, SARS-CoV-1, and SARS-CoV-2. I'm going to be focusing on its activity against these three viruses specifically. So one explanation for the broad activity against numerous genogroups of coronaviruses is the highly conserved nature of the NSP12 enzyme, or the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, which is the viral target for Remdesivir. This is shown in the figure on the left, where we can see an upwards of 90% homology across viruses, approaching identical sequences with certain combinations. This is in direct contrast to the genetic variability in spike proteins, which are used for host cell entry. We can see on the right where shades of red represent homology of lower than 50% across viruses, which represents high diversity and allows viruses to target receptors in their respective host species. Next, let's look further at antiviral activity. Now, since the majority of us are not virology experts, and this past year is probably the first time we've ever encountered some of these terms, I'd like to define them briefly for you. The EC50, or effective concentration 50, which in this case is the concentration required to produce half maximal inhibition of virus yield and viral replication, is a parameter for potency. The CC50, or cytotoxic concentration 50, is the concentration required to produce 50% cytotoxic activity in the cell lines under study, which correlates to toxicity. The selectivity index is a ratio of the two concentrations, with CC50 being divided by EC50, with a higher ratio in this case for remdesivir, representing higher selectivity for viral polymerases. Looking at in vitro activity of remdesivir, it has submicromolar activity across SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-1, MERS-CoV, and Ebola, with relatively high CC50 values. And this translates to high in vitro potency against these viruses and maintaining high selectivity for viral targets. So this is in contrast to other agents that were being explored or that were explored for SARS-CoV-2 activity, like the nucleoside analogs ribavirin, penciclovir, and favipiravir, which all have relatively high EC50 value.
Cons and pros. Cons. Risk of death was rated among patients who were 70 years of age or older. The most common adverse events were increased hepatic enzymes, diarrhea, rash, renal impairment, and hypotension. In general, adverse events were more common in patients receiving invasive ventilation. Most common serious adverse events, multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, septic shock, acute kidney injury, and hypotension, were reported in patients who were receiving invasive ventilation at baseline. For patients, only 8% discontinued remdesivir treatment prematurely, one because of worsening of pre-existing renal failure, one because of multiple organ failure, and two because of elevated aminotransferases, including one patient with a maculopapular rash.
Clinical trials. The most notable adverse event reported is transaminitis, with an onset ranging from 5 to 25 days and resolution occurring 3 to 47 days thereafter. This led to the development of transaminase-based exclusion criteria for clinical trials. Other adverse events that have been observed include infusion site reactions, gastrointestinal events including nausea, constipation, and dyspepsia, and headache.
Pros. During a median follow-up of 18 days, 36 patients, which is 68%, had improvement in oxygen support class. 17 of 30 patients, which is 57%, received mechanical ventilation who were extubated. A total of 25 patients, which is 47%, were discharged. 7 patients, which is 13%, died. Mortality was 18% among patients receiving invasive ventilation and only 5% among those not receiving invasive ventilation.
What remdesivir does is it keeps the virus from replicating. Basically, it tricks COVID-19 into using the medicine instead of its own natural building blocks. The FDA has approved remdesivir for patients 12 years old and older who are hospitalized with the virus. Emory was one of the launch partners for the trial. They had 103 participants, making them the leading enrolling site in the world. The trial showed that this drug reduced recovery time from 15 to 10 days. It decreased time patients required oxygen, and it reduced mortality from almost 12% to 6.7%. Dr. Anish Mehta says there were fewer side effects in those getting the drug than those getting the placebo, and getting it early helps.
We do believe remdesivir is probably most effective early in the infection, and therefore we would like to offer it to patients as early into their diagnosis as possible. One of the limitations of remdesivir is that it can only be given through intravenous access. So patients need to have an IV and therefore need to be in a healthcare setting to receive it.
Dr. Mehta says to make remdesivir more available, they hope to find a way to administer it through an inhaler or orally, or possibly to have outpatient facilities that can administer it intravenously to those who need it.
Application in Ecuador. Ecuador is the first country in the region to receive a donation of 1,900 doses of Remdesivir from the United States. A laboratory yielded with the support of Biotoscana for use in cases of Covid-19 designated for 320 patients, especially in the ICU hospitalization. According to the Hospital of the Ministry of the Public Health, the drug will be distributed to hospital establishments nationwide with the highest demand for COVID-19 patients. This testing phase will serve to measure the results of Remdesivir. Conclusion. In this cohort of patients hospitalized for severe COVID-19 who were treated with compassionate use Remdesivir, clinical improvement was observed in 36 of 53 patients, which is 68%, which is a good amount. Measurement of efficacy will require ongoing randomized, placebo-controlled trials of Remdesivir therapy.
And in summary, Remdesivir significantly reduced time to clinical recovery in the ACT-1 study. This benefit is most apparent in patients requiring low-flow oxygen supplementation, but a modest benefit has been seen in or has been observed in patients with moderate disease as well, as evidenced in the SIMPLE2 trial. No mortality benefit has been observed in the overall patient population. Further refinement of meta-analyses are required to explore the possible benefit in lower risk groups, in particular patients requiring low-flow oxygen supplementation. The sum total of the data are not definitively supportive of a hard 10-day cutoff for symptom onset, and additionally, in patients who do derive benefit of therapy, it appears that 5 days is equally efficacious as 10 days of therapy. And lastly, serious and non-serious adverse events have been observed at similar or lower rates than placebo in our controlled trials, confirming that Remdesivir is well tolerated overall. Here's a list of selected ongoing clinical trials and an updated log of changes. And thank you very much for your attention. Please don't hesitate to reach out should you have any questions.
Thank you guys for watching and listening to me.